September 1943, BDU Headquarters, Carnival near Lorient. Grand Admiral Carl Dunnett stared at the monthly loss reports and uttered words his staff had never heard from him before. It is impossible. We are being detected before we can even complete our position reports. Something is finding my submarines the moment they surface. He was right and he was wrong. British escorts were locating U-boat within moments of their radio operators touching the Morse key. A technology so advanced that German scientists believed it beyond reach. Dunnett spent the remaining years of the war hunting for an explanation. He investigated radar. He blamed infrared detection. He even ordered his crews to stop using their own equipment, convinced it was betraying their positions. He never found the answer. One of the most decisive tactical tools in the Allied anti-submarine arsenal remained a mystery to the Kriegsmarine until the final surrender. It was called HFDF, high-frequency direction finding. The crews who operated it called it Huff Duff, and it worked so well that German commanders went to their graves, believing radar alone had defeated them. This is how British engineers gave convoy escorts a weapon that changed the tempo of the Atlantic War and why the Marine never understood what was killing them. By 1942, Britain faced extinction. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could build them. In March 1943 alone, submarines destroyed 82 vessels totaling 476,000 tons. Food rationing tightened, fuel reserves dwindled. Churchill himself later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him. During the war, the mathematics were brutal and simple. Britain imported 55 million tons of goods annually before the war. By 1942, that figure had dropped to 33 million tons. The island nation depended on convoys for everything: food, oil, aircraft, tanks, ammunition. Without the Atlantic lifeline, Britain could not eat, could not fight, and could not survive. The U-boat's greatest advantage was invisibility. A surface submarine presented a silhouette barely larger than a fishing boat. Against the gray Atlantic swells, spotting one visually required extraordinary luck. Radar helped, but early sets were unreliable and short-ranged. Aircraft could patrol, but the mid-Atlantic gap, that 1,000 mi stretch beyond land-based air cover, remained a hunting ground where wolf packs operated with near impunity. Donuts had perfected a system that exploited this advantage ruthlessly. His wolfpack tactics required constant communication. U-boat would spread across convoy routes in patrol lines, sometimes stretching 500 m or more. Each submarine took a position approximately 30 miles from its neighbor, creating a net across the most likely shipping lanes. When one submarine spotted a convoy, it did not attack immediately. Instead, it shadowed the merchant ships and transmitted contact reports to U-boat headquarters in Lorient on the French coast. These reports included position, course, speed, and estimated number of ships. Dunnett and his staff, working from a giant plot showing all known submarines and convoys, then directed other U-boat to converge on the target. The concentration phase could take 12 to 24 hours. During that time, the shadowing submarine transmitted repeatedly, updating headquarters on any changes in the convoy's movements. Only when sufficient force had assembled Donat signal the attack, typically at night when surface escorts struggled to detect the low silhouettes of surface submarines. The system worked brilliantly. Convoy HX-229, attacked in March 1943, lost 21 ships to a pack of over 40 U-boat. Convoy SC-122, attacked simultaneously, lost another 9. Over 30 merchant ships destroyed. In just 4 days. It remains one of the worst Allied convoy disasters of the Atlantic War. But the system also contained a fatal vulnerability that German intelligence never identified. Every transmission revealed the U-boat's approximate position. Radio signals travel in straight lines from their source. If you could determine the direction of an incoming signal, you could draw a bearing on a chart. Get bearings from 2 or more stations, and where those lines crossed marked the transmitter's location. This principle, direction finding, had existed since the First World War. Shore-based stations across Britain tracked German naval communications throughout both conflicts. But shore stations had a critical limitation. They required triangulation from multiple fixed positions, often hundreds of miles apart. The resulting fixes were accurate enough for strategic intelligence, telling the Admiralty that U-boat were operating in a general area. They were far too imprecise for tactical use. Knowing a submarine was somewhere in a 50 m radius did not help a convoy trying to avoid it, let alone an escort trying to hunt it. What the Royal Navy needed was direction-finding equipment that worked from ships. Equipment that could give an escort captain an immediate bearing to a transmitting U-boat. Equipment that could turn the Marines' own communications into a death warrant. By the standards of existing technology, this seemed beyond reach. The problem was physics. Traditional direction finding required rotating a loop antenna until the radio signal reached minimum strength. This null point indicated the direction of the transmitter. The process took approximately 1 minute for a skilled operator. U-boat radio men, well aware of the threat from shore-based direction finding, had developed countermeasures. Their CURT signal system compressed tactical messages into coded 4-letter groups. Contact reports that once took minutes could be transmitted in 20 seconds or less. German calculations showed that 20 seconds was too brief for manual direction finding. By the time an operator rotated his antenna to find the null, the transmission had ended. Their CURT signal procedure seemed unbeatable. What the Germans did not know was that British technology had leapt an entire generation ahead. And the breakthrough had come not from naval research, but from tracking thunderstorms. In 1926, a Scottish physicist named Robert Watson Watt faced an unusual problem. Working at the meteorological office, he needed to locate lightning strikes to warn aviators of approaching storms. Lightning produces radio pulses lasting barely a millisecond. No human operator could rotate an antenna fast enough to track something that brief. Watt's solution was elegant. Instead of one rotating antenna, he used 2 fixed antennas mounted at right angles to each other. Each antenna fed its signal into one axis of a cathode ray oscilloscope. The screen displayed a glowing line whose angle matched the direction of the incoming radio signal. No rotation required, no mechanical delay. The bearing appeared instantaneously. He called it the instantaneous direct reading radiogonometer. The system could determine direction on signals lasting just 1/1000th of a second. German CURT signaler at 20 seconds might as well have been continuous broadcasts. On a calm laboratory bench, the concept was elegant. On a steel ship pitching through Atlantic swells with masts and funnels and gun mountings distorting every incoming signal, it was another matter entirely. Making the theory work at sea would take years of engineering. Watt became famous for developing radar. He received a knighthood and appeared in newsreels. His direction-finding work remained classified. Development continued in secret at the Admiralty Signal establishment, first at Portsmouth and later after Luftwaffe bombing at Lith Hill House in Le Mire. The critical remaining challenge was making the technology work aboard ships. A ship's steel superstructure creates electromagnetic interference. Masts, funnels, gun mountings, and rigging all distort incoming radio signals. Tests showed bearing errors of 20 degrees or more, rendering any readings tactically useless. The solution came from an unexpected source. Wacław Straczynski was a Polish engineer who had escaped Warsaw when Germany invaded in 1939. After a circuitous journey through Romania and France, he reached England in 1940. Working with British scientists, he developed a radio frequency balancing circuit and a carefully designed antenna array that compensated for shipboard interference. The antenna mounted above the ship's bridge resembled a cylindrical wire cage. Sailors immediately dubbed it the bird cage. Naval historian Clay Blair later called Straczynski's work a breakthrough of transcendent importance. The impossible had become operational. The first shipborne HFDF sets went to sea in 1941. Early installations aboard destroyers like HMS Gurkha and HMS Lance received the FH-3 outfit, a system using aural null finding with a Bellini togonometer. Operators listened through headphones, adjusting controls until the signal faded to minimum. It worked, but it was slower than the technology allowed. The revolution came with the FH-4 outfit, introduced later that year. This system used Watt's cathode ray tube display. Operators saw the bearing directly on screen, a glowing line pointing toward the transmitting U-boat. No listening required, no manual searching. The direction appeared the instant a submarine's radio operator pressed his Morse key. The FH-4's display tube was, as one sailor described it, as big as a pie plate. A compass rose surrounded the screen. When a U-boat transmitted, a bright line stabbed outward from the center, pointing directly at the source. Operators could read bearings to within 2 degrees, sometimes better. Even more valuable was the system's ability to distinguish close contacts from distant ones. Radio. Signals travel in 2 ways. Ground waves follow the Earth's surface and indicate transmitters nearby, often within easy striking distance for an escort. Sky waves bounce off the ionosphere and can travel hundreds of miles, even thousands. On the FH4 display, ground waves produce sharp, clear lines. Sky waves appeared as blurred ellipses. This distinction told escort commanders everything they needed. A sharp line meant a U-boat was close, probably shadowing the convoy and preparing to transmit a contact report. An escort could be dispatched immediately to run down the bearing at full speed, forcing the submarine to dive before completing its report. A blurred sky wave meant the threat was distant. Useful strategic intelligence, but not an immediate tactical concern. The operators who worked these systems became remarkably skilled at reading the displays. Experience taught them to distinguish genuine contacts from atmospheric interference, to estimate ranges from signal strength, and to identify when multiple submarines were transmitting simultaneously. The best operators developed an almost intuitive feel for their equipment, sensing the presence of U-boat from the character of the signals they received. Training schools at Portsmouth and later Haslemere turned out hundreds of qualified operators. The curriculum combined classroom instruction in radio theory with intensive practical exercises using simulated contacts. By 1943, HFDF operators were considered among the most technically skilled ratings in the Royal Navy. The PI company manufactured FH4 sets at their facilities in Ilford. When bombing threatened production, work was dispersed to protected sites across Britain. By early 1942, a growing number of escorts and rescue ships carried HFDF equipment. By early 1943, multiple ships in every escort group were fitted. The technology had become, in Admiral Thai terminology, common equipment. The Americans received 3 British sets in the summer of 1942. Their scientists, initially skeptical that such performance was achievable, were astonished by what they saw. American industry developed its own version, the DAQ system, and produced over 4,000 units by the war's end. But British escorts had been using HFDF operationally for more than a year before American production began. If you are finding this account of British innovation interesting, subscribing takes just a moment and helps keep these investigations coming. The tactical potential of shipborne HFDF became clear almost immediately, but its full power emerged only when commanders developed new methods that exploited its capabilities. Captain Frederick John Walker became the most successful anti-submarine warfare commander of the Second World War. His personal tally of 17 confirmed U-boat kills exceeded any other Allied commander. More importantly, his methods transformed convoy defense from a reactive scramble into an aggressive hunt. Walker commanded the 2nd Support Group, a roving force of 6 sloops including HMS Starling, Wild Goose, Cygnet, Wren, Woodpecker, and Kite. Unlike close escort groups tied to specific convoys, support groups could be directed to threatened areas and conduct offensive sweeps. HFDF made those sweeps devastatingly effective. February 1944. Near convoy LEL 147 in the Eastern Atlantic. The HFDF operator aboard HMS Wild Goose detected a transmission bearing roughly 10 miles from the convoy's position. A sharp line on the display. Ground wave close contact. Commander Derek Winey, captain of Wild Goose, immediately reported to Walker aboard Starling. Both ships increased to full speed, racing down the bearing. What followed was a textbook demonstration of Walker's creeping attack. The target was a Type 7C submarine that had been shadowing the convoy. When the approaching escorts forced her captain to dive, Walker's ships established ASDIC contact. But instead of the traditional depth charge run, which U-boat could often evade by listening for the attacking ship's propellers and turning sharply, Walker used a different method. Sling maintained ASDIC contact from approximately 1,500 yards, far enough that the submarine's hydrophones could not detect her. Wild Goose approached at dead slow speed, her engines barely turning, creeping toward the position Starling's ASDIC indicated. The U-boat's crew, listening for the telltale sounds of an attacking destroyer, heard nothing. They believed they had evaded. Walker's voice came over the radio, directing Wild Goose with precision. Left 5 degrees steady forward. The submarine remained oblivious until the depth charges exploded directly above her. The attack lasted over 3 hours. The submarine was destroyed. That same day, HMS Kite was operating independently when her HFDF operator detected another transmission. Following the bearing, Kite's lookout spotted a conning tower emerging from mist at close range. A second U-boat had surfaced to transmit and found herself staring at a British sloop. The submarine crash-dived immediately. Kite and HMS Magpie maintained contact for hours, trading off ASDIC tracking while Walker brought Starling to join them. The combined attack destroyed the second submarine with a Hedgehog salvo. Before the day ended, a third U-boat also went down. 3 submarines destroyed in 24 hours. Walker's single most successful patrol sank 6 submarines in January and February 1944. He died of cerebral thrombosis on July 9, 1944, worn out by relentless convoy battles. The Admiralty credited him with doing more to defeat the U-boat than any other single officer. Walker was not alone in demonstrating what HFDF enabled. Commander Donald McIntyre of Escort Group B-2 became another master of the technology. In March 1941, before shipborne HFDF was widely available, McIntyre had already captured Otto Kretschmer, Germany's leading U-boat ace. After a prolonged hunt, once his ships received FH-4 equipment, McIntyre's success rate increased dramatically. His tactics exemplified the aggressive use that HFDF permitted. Rather than waiting passively near the convoy, McIntyre dispatched destroyers to run down every detected bearing at full speed. Even when the U-boat dived before the escort arrived, the submarine lost contact with the convoy and had to restart its approach from scratch. Each forced dive cost the U-boat battery power and oxygen. After several such interruptions, submarines often had to withdraw entirely to recharge. The frigate HMS Tay, part of Commander Gretton's B-7 group, demonstrated another tactical application during the battle for convoy. ONS-5. Lieutenant Commander Robert Sherwood used his HFDF not merely to locate threats, but to map the developing wolfpack. By plotting multiple bearings over several hours, he built a picture of how many submarines surrounded the convoy and from which directions attacks were most likely. This situational awareness allowed Gretton to concentrate his limited escorts on the most threatened sectors. When fog descended on the night of May 5, reducing visibility to almost nothing, the escorts were already positioned where the attacks would come. 10 centimeters radar, invisible to German detectors, caught submarines on the surface. HFDF had told the escorts where to look. Radar finished the job. 26 attack attempts that night were thwarted. Not a single submarine penetrated to the convoy. The strategic turning point came in May 1943, what the Germans would later call Black May. Convoy ONS-5 departed Liverpool on April 22, bound for Halifax with 43 merchant ships. Commander Peter Gretton led Escort Group B-7 with his flagship HMS Duncan equipped with FH-4 HFDF. His force included 2 destroyers, a frigate, and 4 corvettes, a total of 7 warships to protect 43 merchant men across 3,000 miles of U-boat-infested ocean. Gretton knew his convoy faced a gauntlet. Intelligence indicated multiple U-boat patrol lines across the North Atlantic. What he did not know was exactly how many. The answer was 42 submarines from the Finn and Wolf packs. Nearly a quarter of all operational U-boat in the Atlantic had been concentrated against his convoy. Dunnet sensed that the next few months would determine the campaign's outcome. He was committing everything. The weather proved almost as dangerous as the enemy. Gales battered the convoy for the first week. Ships scattered. Stragglers fell behind. Gretton's destroyer HMS Duncan ran dangerously low on fuel and had to detach for Iceland, taking his most capable sub-hunter out of the battle. He transferred his flag to the corvette HMS T and pressed on. The battle that followed lasted 9 days. It demonstrated everything HFDF could achieve and everything it could not prevent when outnumbered 10-1. Gretton's operators detected U-boat transmissions almost continuously. Each contact report from a shadowing submarine produced a bearing that Duncan's HFDF displayed instantly. Gretton dispatched escorts to run down the bearings, forcing submarines to dive and lose contact. When multiple bearings came in simultaneously, he prioritized the closest, the ground wave contacts that indicated immediate threats. But 42 submarines were too many. Even when driven off, they would surface again, spread across different quadrants, and resume shadowing. Attacks came at night in fog from multiple directions. 13 merchant ships went down. The convoy's losses made headlines. What received less attention was the cost the wolf packs paid. 6 U-boats were confirmed destroyed by escorts or aircraft during the battle. Another was so badly damaged she had to abort her patrol. The exchange rate, roughly 2 merchant ships for each submarine, was unprecedented. More importantly, the pattern held through the following weeks. May 1943 saw 41 U-boats destroyed. Fully 25% of operational strength. Allied losses that month dropped to just 34 merchant ships, barely a quarter of the March figures. On May 24, 1943, Dunnet made a decision that shocked his staff. He ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The campaign that had nearly strangled Britain was suspended indefinitely. In his war diary, Donats attributed the disaster to radar and air power. The words HFDF did not appear. The following month, Gretton's B-7 escort group shepherded convoy SC-130 across the Atlantic. The result was a masterpiece of integrated defense. 0 merchant ships lost. Between 3 and 5 U-boats destroyed, including U-954. That submarine carried a passenger whose death carried personal weight for the German High Command. Oberleutnant Z. Peter Dunitz, the Grand Admiral's son, went down with U-954. His father learned of the loss through routine casualty reports. There is no record of Dunnet connecting his son's death to the technology that had located the submarine. He continued to blame radar. The Royal Canadian Navy's contribution to the Battle of the Atlantic deserves particular recognition, and the story of HFDF equipment highlights both their sacrifice and the challenges they faced. Canada entered the war with a navy of 13 vessels. By 1945, the Royal Canadian Navy had grown to the 3rd largest in the world with 95,000 personnel and over 270 ocean escort warships. Canadian escort groups safely shepherded more than 25,000 merchant ships carrying 165 million tons of supplies. By the war's end, Canadians handled roughly half of all Atlantic convoys. This extraordinary expansion came at a cost. The Royal Canadian Navy was building ships, training crews, and fighting battles simultaneously. There was never enough time, never enough equipment, and never enough experienced officers to go around. Training that should have taken months was compressed into weeks. Yet 1942 exposed a critical equipment gap that cost lives. HMCS Restigouche was the only Canadian ship fitted with HFDF that year. The destroyers HMCS Star-Ottawa and Skeena, the backbone of Canadian escort forces, went into battle without the technology that was transforming British convoy defense. A single equipped vessel meant triangulation was impossible. The ship could determine a bearing to a transmitting U-boat, but not the range. Convoy SC-107 demonstrated the consequences. In November 1942, 43 ships departed Sydney, Cape Breton, bound for Britain. The escort included HMCS Restigouche's senior ship with a mixed force of Canadian corvettes and a Royal Navy destroyer. The Germans had assembled the Velin Wolfpack, 15 submarines positioned across the convoy's probable route. Restigouche detected 25 HFDF transmissions from 8 U-boats shadowing the convoy. Her operators identified bearings accurately, but with no second HFDF ship to provide crossing bearings, precise positions remained unknown. The escorts could run down bearings, forcing brief dives, but could not pin down submarines for destruction. Over 5 days, the Wolfpack attacked repeatedly. 15 merchant ships went down. 62,000 tons of shipping lost. 208 merchant sailors died. It was one of the worst convoy disasters Canada suffered during the war, and the equipment gap was a significant factor. The lesson was not lost on the Admiralty. By mid-1943, Canadian ships were receiving HFDF sets in growing numbers. The tactical transformation was immediate. When properly equipped, Canadian escorts proved deadly effective. During convoy ONS 102 in June 1942, Resty used her HFDF to locate and drive off 5 U-boat in a single day as they made sighting reports. 2 were damaged in the encounters. The convoy reached its destination without loss. HMCS Swansea became the most successful Canadian submarine hunter, participating in the destruction of 4 U-boat during the war. Her captain, Commander Charles Picard, developed tactics that integrated HFDF with radar and ASDIC into a seamless hunting system. Other Canadian ships that contributed to U-boat kills included HMCS, Saint Laurent, Chambly, and Vilda, Quebec. The Royal Canadian Navy ultimately destroyed or shared credit for 33 enemy submarines. Canadian shore-based HFDF stations at Lambeth near London, Ontario, Gordon Head in Victoria, and sites across Newfoundland and the Maritimes integrated with the British network, filling critical coverage gaps in the Western Atlantic where British shore stations could not reach. In London's Admiralty Citadel, a heavily fortified bunker beneath Horse Guards Parade, the submarine tracking room operated around the clock. Here, Commander Roger Wynne fused every available intelligence source into a constantly updated picture of U-boat dispositions across the Atlantic. Wynne was an unlikely figure for such critical work. A barrister in civilian life, he had contracted polio as a young man and walked with difficulty. His mind, however, moved with extraordinary speed. He developed an almost intuitive ability to predict U-boat movements, anticipating where Donuts would send his submarines before the orders were even transmitted. The tracking room received ultra-decrypts from Bletchley Park when available. It received agent reports from occupied France. It received interrogation intelligence from captured crews. But its most consistent source was HFDF, both from shore stations ringing the Atlantic and from the growing fleet of equipped escort ships. Shore-based stations could triangulate distant contacts, providing strategic warning of patrol line positions. Shipborne HFDF provided tactical real-time intelligence that allowed escorts to react within minutes. The combination gave convoy commanders something unprecedented: situational awareness of submarine positions across hundreds of miles of ocean. During the Enigma blackout of February to December 1942, when German introduction of a fourth rotor rendered Atlantic U-boat communications temporarily unreadable, the tracking room continued functioning. Wynne developed what he called a working fiction using HFDF bearings, transmission pattern analysis, and operational knowledge to estimate submarine positions without decrypted messages. His assessments proved remarkably accurate, allowing continued convoy routing around U-boat concentrations even when Ultra was silent. The question that haunted German intelligence throughout the war was simple. How were the British locating U-boat with such precision? Dunnet and his staff considered many possibilities. They held conference after conference. They interrogated returning commanders. They studied loss patterns and searched for correlations. The answers they found were always wrong. Radar was the obvious suspect, and it was partly correct. British centimetric radar operating on 10 centimeters wavelengths undetectable by German warning receivers had transformed air patrols from random searches into targeted hunts. By 1943, Coastal Command aircraft were catching U-boat on the surface with alarming regularity. But radar could not explain everything. Contacts occurred at ranges exceeding 50 miles, far beyond any radar's reach. Submarines were being located the moment they surfaced to transmit before any aircraft could possibly have spotted them. Something else was happening, and German intelligence could not identify what. In mid-1943, German investigators pursued a bizarre theory that would cost them dearly. A captured British officer, possibly deliberately misleading his interrogators or possibly simply confused, suggested that Allied aircraft were homing on electromagnetic emissions from German equipment aboard the submarines themselves. The MTOX radar warning receiver was the obvious candidate. German technicians tested MTO units in laboratory conditions and discovered they did produce faint radiation. The signal was weak, detectable only at close range under ideal circumstances. But German scientists, desperate for any explanation, seized on this finding. In August 1943, Donitz issued a fleet-wide order. All MITO's equipment was to be disabled. Crews were instructed to remove essential components and lock them away. U-boat would operate blind, rather than risk betraying their positions. This was a catastrophic self-inflicted wound. MTOX emissions were not the reason submarines were being found. The actual threats, centimetric radar that could find surface submarines and HFDF that located them the moment they transmitted continued completely unaffected. But now, U-boat crews had lost their only warning system against approaching aircraft. Losses from air attack increased sharply. German resources poured into developing replacement radar warning receivers. The Ones and Borm sets covered different frequency bands, searching for radar emissions that did not exist. Months of engineering effort addressed a problem that was never real. While the actual vulnerabilities remained unidentified, the Germans even investigated infrared detection. Intelligence suggested the British might be homing on the heat from diesel engines or the body warmth of crews on the bridge. Special paint was applied to U-boat conning towers to reduce thermal signatures. Procedures were developed for operating with minimal heat emission. All of it was useless. Infrared detection was not being employed against submarines. Throughout 1944, German scientists continued pursuing phantom threats. They developed the Courier burst transmission system capable of compressing a complete message into well under a second. This was genuinely brilliant engineering. A transmission lasting less than half a second was beyond even British HFDF operators' ability to read accurately. The system might actually have worked, but development was delayed repeatedly. Allied bombing of the Telefunken works disrupted production. Component shortages slowed manufacturing. Priority was given to other projects. Only 4 Courier sets were ever fitted to operational U-boat installed at Kiel in early 1945. The war ended before they could be deployed operationally. The fundamental failure was one of imagination. German radio intelligence knew direction finding existed. Their own bed service tracked Allied transmissions across Europe. Counterintelligence units in occupied France and the Low Countries hunted resistance radio operators using direction-finding trucks. German operators understood the principle intimately, but their own technology required approximately 1 minute to determine a bearing. They calculated that signals shorter than 10 seconds were safe from direction finding. When their CURT signal procedure compressed transmissions to 20 seconds, they believed the problem was solved. What they could not imagine was that British scientists had developed instantaneous direction finding more than a decade earlier. Watt's cathode ray oscilloscope method had appeared in scientific literature. It had even been demonstrated in newsreel films. But the concept was, as one post-war assessment noted, largely ignored outside the United Kingdom. German scientists, confident in their own expertise, never grasped that the British had leapt ahead. A 1945 British intelligence assessment of captured German documents concluded that no better confirmation of the satisfactory development of HFDF equipment in Great Britain exists than the German admission after September 1945 that their own work on this particular research had been inadequate. German officers admitted they had experienced great difficulty locating U-boat. They never understood that the difficulty arose from their own communications. Grand Admiral Karl Dunnet survived the war. He served briefly as Hitler's successor, presiding over the Reich's final days and signing the instruments of surrender. He spent 10 years imprisoned at Spandau for war crimes. Upon release, he wrote his memoirs 10 years and 20 days published in 1958. In those memoirs, Donuts attributed the defeat of his U-boat fleet to radar, Allied air power, and industrial superiority. His assessment of the turning point was characteristically blunt. The Battle of the Atlantic was nearly won prior to July 1942 when German losses were within reasonable limits, but they jumped 300% when Allied aircraft, aided by radar, which came like an epileptic stroke, were used in the fight. He was partly right. Radar mattered enormously. Centimetric sets that U-boat could not detect transformed coastal command from a nuisance into a mortal threat. Air power closed the mid-Atlantic gap that wolfpacks had exploited so ruthlessly. But HFDF never appeared in his analysis. Nor did Ultra, the systematic breaking of Enigma communications that gave the Allies insight into German intentions. Throughout the war, Donuts went to his grave in 1980, not understanding the full picture of what had defeated him. By that point, the truth was public knowledge. British official histories published in the 1950s mentioned HFDF extensively. The ultra-secret emerged in 1974. Academic studies increasingly emphasize the integrated nature of Allied anti-submarine success. The combination of intelligence, technology, tactics, and industrial capacity that together overwhelmed the Kriegsmarine. Modern assessments credit HFDF with involvement in approximately 24% of all U-boat sinkings during the war. Naval historian Jeffrey Mason called it with radar and codering a primary factor in the Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. The American official naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison wrote that HFD was one of the most useful Allied weapons in the Atlantic. The technology's impact extended beyond raw kill counts. Every U-boat forced to dive lost contact with its target convoy. Every interrupted transmission disrupted Wolfpack coordination. Every hour spent submerged drained batteries and depleted air supplies. HFDF made the Atlantic a far more hostile environment for submarines, even when it did not directly cause their destruction. Post-war analysis revealed the full scale of German intelligence failure. Interrogated officers expressed genuine surprise that shipborne direction finding had been possible at all. They had believed, reasonably given their own technical limitations, that the physics made it impossible. The existence of instantaneous cathode ray systems had simply never occurred to them. British scientists, for their part, had kept the secret extraordinarily well. Unlike radar, which German intelligence eventually understood fairly accurately, HFDF remained mysterious to the enemy throughout the conflict. Even the bird cage antennas visible on British escorts were misidentified in German recognition manuals as radar arrays. The technology continued serving long after 1945. Cold War navies used direction finding extensively against Soviet submarines. The basic principles Watson-Watt demonstrated in 1926 using phase comparison and cathode ray displays for instantaneous bearing determination remained relevant through the age of nuclear submarines and beyond. September 1943. Headquarters Berlin. Dunnet stared at reports that made no sense. Submarines were being located within minutes of surfacing. His intelligence staff proposed theories, tested equipment, developed countermeasures against threats that did not exist. Somewhere in the Atlantic, a British escort's HFDF operator watched his cathode ray tube. A bright line stabbed across the screen, sharp and clear. Ground wave contact. Close. He noted the bearing and called up to the bridge. Contact bearing 045. Estimated range 12 m. The captain ordered full speed and rang for action stations. The U-boat crew, finishing their transmission and preparing to dive, never knew they had already been found. British engineers had solved the shipborne direction finding problem that others believed beyond reach. They had made a ship's pitching deck as stable a platform as any shore station. They had compressed direction finding from 1 minute to a fraction of a second. They had turned the Kriegsmarine's own communications into a targeting system that German intelligence never identified. HFDF did not win the Battle of the Atlantic alone. It worked alongside radar ultra-improved depth charges, Hedgehog mortars, escort carriers, long-range aircraft, and the raw industrial might of the Allies. Victory came from systems working together, not from any single wonder weapon. But HFDF provided something none of those other systems could. Real-time tactical intelligence that told escort commanders exactly where the threat was hiding. It changed the tempo of the battle. Every transmission Dunnet demanded from his captains. Every contact report, every weather observation, every status update handed the Allies a bearing to their position. The more aggressively the Wolfpacks communicated, the more precisely the British tracked them. The system that made coordinated attacks possible also made coordinated destruction inevitable. Walker understood this. Gretton understood it. The operators hunched over their FH-4 displays understood it. The only people who never understood were the ones dying because of it. But the Kriegsmarine's communications network that proved so lethal to U-boat also enabled something else. Something the Germans used against British convoys with devastating effect. At least until British Codreek is at Bletchley Park turned the tables. That story of signals, intelligence, and counterintelligence, of encrypted messages and broken codes, reveals how close the Battle of the Atlantic truly came and how differently it might have ended.